How about this? How about in the early segments, as we're on this topic anyway? Let's actually make this a little topic. Let's talk about some things, for example, where what is it like to coach? What's different? What are the challenges that you could never know if you were just someone in the analysis world? Because obviously one of the things we do actually do, me on talk shows or you if you're doing a broadcast, we have to critique coaches sometimes. You know, sometimes we give them praise. Like for example, right now we're all giving Extaz loads of praise from Vitality, but then at the same time we're trashing someone else. And we don't really know what either of these groups of people do. Like in that case, that guy doesn't do content in English. I've never actually been able to have a conversation with him. So, like Janko, on your side, obviously you did it for a few years. What are the most different things about actually being a coach than what you imagine it's going to be like when you take the gigs?
Well, I think the biggest difference is like you're definitely not aware with how much player management you need to do and just like deal with the most basic stuff, like making sure everyone is on time, making sure if you tell people to do something that they actually go and do it, and check up on them if they're like doing the things you gave them, like whether it's whether you want to call it homework or some extra stuff they need to work on, or just given some tasks before a game. If you go through your opponent before the game, right, like the anti-stratting or whatever, that they're actually paying attention and then seeing those things in the game. So, and I knew that, for example, I didn't have any illusions that I was going to come in and work on strats and tactics and
right
and stuff like that, and that's going to be it. I knew the big part of it is management and creating a good atmosphere within the team and all that stuff. But you are surprised by at the end of the day, these guys are getting paid a lot of money and they're professionals that they've been around for a long time. So some of that babysitting stuff, like the amount of it which I personally had to do, was like definitely surprising, because I think fans on the outside probably think, oh, these guys are pros. There's no way someone can oversleep 3 times in 1 week for practice,
sure,
or something like that. But or have like a terrible sleeping schedule, or not have their priorities in place when it comes to their approach to the game and stuff like that. So yeah, I think for me that was the biggest shock of all.
What about you, Jason?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. Especially, I mean, Janko didn't have this. This is one of the areas where I think I got a little bit fortunate with the organization side, where I came into a team that has an analyst on the side that helps. Nice. I have, and I have we have a sports psychologist on staff here. Ooh. So a lot of it is just like, I know it's fancy.
Tell me more, Jason. Keep going. Keep going.
It's not just like managing like the players, which is its own thing, but also you're also like managing, what does an analyst bring to the table, and then how can I transfer the information that he brings over to the players for the match? How can I learn to read when someone might be beneficial for them to sit down with the sports psychologist? And you have, at least Liquid has given me all these tools, and a lot of it is like learning how to manage, the different tools around me to get like the most effective use out of all of them. And that was probably the area where I struggled the most, not having any like real management experience. I've never had like a team of like 3 people that I've been able to turn to and say, I need you to do this, this, and this. So marshaling those resources is a unique challenge. I don't know, in terms of the other stuff, it's I think there's just like a lot of, especially during COVID, like it's weird because I think I've gotten away with a few things, like the babysitting issue. I haven't had to worry about so much. Like it's still there, but
just because in person, you mean?
Or once we get into the land. Once we get into the person, we're at the facility, and it's also during COVID, so we're quarantined. We can't like go anywhere.
Right.
So our apartments are on like floor 3, and on floor 2 is the training facility. So we walk downstairs, and we have a cafeteria, and we have a scrim room, and we have all these different things. So it's pretty easy in being self-contained. I haven't had to do anything like at an event quite yet. So that's I don't know. The other part is juggling all the different. Again, this is something that Janko probably had to deal with just a little bit, but the COVID situation and juggling all the different random distractions and obstacles that pop up. Like one day really wanting to work with the team and then having to sit in, an hour or 2 hours of calls about, travel regulations and visa requirements and documentation and stuff. So, dealing with that kind of stuff is its own little thing as well. But yeah, overall it's been cool. It's just, there's a lot of just odd challenges that pop up here and there.
Actually, along those lines, one thing I want to ask both of you, since you both did coach during the era where we just had to only play online, and obviously we know the tournament schedule for teams like the ones that you guys work with was ram-packed the whole time. Was it the case, Moses? Like, did the online era play even more into the complaints you've often voiced about, like, oversaturation on LAN? Because you were one of the people that always made the point. The reason why you didn't want the same teams to meet continuously is so that, you know, you had, like, time to evolve since then, like, go home and boot camp and practice. Like, online, I got the sense that it was even more ridiculous because, like, put it this way, even though I don't want it as extreme as this, one thing I've always liked about games like League of Legends, for example, is if you go, especially in Korea, they used to, back in the day, give you like a week to prep for your playoff match. And in a week, you would really sometimes get like, you know, like an underdog could sometimes make like, you know, exactly the right like miracle strategy or come up with some genius concept. But the point is you're probably not going to do that in like half a day and especially if you play a match at like, you know, like 10 and the next match is 2 p.m. the next day. Like, I don't even know what you'd scout then. What demos for the next game? Like demos for your own team? What do you do in that amount of time? Like, what's your thoughts on that, Moses?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it would be, I've always wanted, because I think it'd be cool just to, like, I would love to just have like 6 months, I guess, to try it, is like have an actual schedule where you knew an opponent like 3-4 days in advance and you could actually prepare an entire game plan for an opponent. I would love to see how that could evolve, you know, professional Counter-Strike. It's kind of a pipe dream. It'll obviously not happen anytime soon that we'd be able to have any kind of schedule like that. But I mean, I don't know, the online era was its own like unique situation too, because there's oversaturation, and especially in North America, people, you know, talk about the practice partners that we have, but that was never like the biggest issue to me. It did come down to the fact that, you know, every tournament was kind of like this grueling battle between, or not grueling, but, you know, Furia, EG, and Liquid were usually fighting. 100 Thieves was up there a couple of times, and obviously when we started to struggle towards the end of the online time in North America, some other teams popped up and upset us. But it just gets like monotonous because like no event feels any different. It's all like an online best of 3 against the same teams that you just played in the last one. North America had its pool of like 6 teams that you could pick from, and those were the 6 teams that were going to be at every single event. And I think, you know, the problem with online in Europe isn't necessarily the same, but you at least get some difference of opponents coming in from like the random CIS teams that are crazy good online that can qualify for an event out of nowhere. So they at least had a little bit of variety and more variety in practice partners to mix things up. But for us, it was like, man, there were just 4 teams repeatedly. So I think the real challenge for me in the online era was when I first joined as a coach, we had like 3 events back to back. So I think we only had like 2 days off from officials or something like that in the first 2 to 3 weeks that I was there, or during like one of the early stretches. And that becomes like a challenge of how much do you want to work on changing things when you have this kind of crazy match schedule, or do you just focus on preparing for your opponents instead of working on fixing some of the issues that you know you need to fix, but you just don't feel there's time because you have a match the next day. And that was the hardest thing for me to juggle when I first started.
What would you say, Janko?
Yeah, I think for the online part, it's just, I think the big problem was, I remember talking about this before, is all the tournament organizers started changing their formats. So it included round robin best of 3s, then, you know, I'm just waiting for a triple elimination bracket or something like that, best of 5s all the way, why not, right? So that becomes the problem. I think it was Pro League or some tournament like that where we played 10 best of 3s in 11 days. You know, it's crazy, especially during COVID, you know, in Belgrade, where it wasn't just me, it was Nico and Cole living here as well. You know, you had like strict quarantine measures. So it was like after 5 p.m. you couldn't, like curfew, you couldn't leave your apartment, right? So you can't even, you know, do something to chill out, go out for a walk, anything like that. So it was definitely challenging, and also just working online. I think you and me talked about this in the Reflections interview. It's like a lot of players would just retire if this was how, you know, the scene looked like. It's just not fun to sit in your own room by yourself, you know, and just grind every day a different official and all of that stuff. And it was unfortunate in our case that we just weren't able to do a boot camp at all. Like last time I saw my players all together was in Katowice still, you know. And I even left the
team. That is wild.
In the meanwhile, right? Like I left the team without actually like being there with them and getting everyone together and just having a proper meeting, right? So it's just crazy, and we see teams doing it more and more. Like even back then, like in the first half of the year, teams doing it, and And it's just the feeling of, fist bumping someone, being loud. I mean, MIBR is probably the opposite part of the scale when you see them, how crazy they get when they play. But it definitely helps compared to some other team where players are just, on their own in a room and just, playing together. You just don't have that feeling, like Jason said. We're playing Cologne online, which is when things are normal, the craziest event of the year.
Sure.
And you're like trying to get yourself hyped and motivated, but it's really hard because the environment is completely the same compared to Pro League that's after that, the Summit that was before that. For you, nothing changes. So that was definitely a big challenge.
I think that actually just one other weird thing that happened to me as well with coaching, and it speaks to that too, is I did like 2 to 3 months of online coaching when I started, and then once we got the team finally together, it's like a completely different team when you get like all 5-6 players together at the facility or at a tournament or in any kind of environment than it is when they're all split up in their homes across the countries or across Europe or across North America. So for me, it was like I had like I started coaching twice. Like I had the coaching of the online, and then you get to the boot camp, and I'm like, holy shit, the interactions between players are completely different. There are certain like issues or problems that like disappeared and faded away, and then there's certain new ones that popped up. So it was like starting all over again.
People are actually engaged in conversation and contributing to the conversations that you have.
Sure. I mean, I could totally imagine, by the way, why that would even be an issue, because I know a lot of the pro players, even from like just my own experiences with them. Dude, there's so many pro players where if you put them, like Janko's saying, at a massive event, like could be a major, Cologne, Katowice, you put them at that event and you put them in a real match and then eliminate them, say, like round of 8, like 9th to 12th. They'll all tell you all that's like, all of a sudden, the most lazy, like procrastinating guy, because like gives you the talk as though he's going to be like Tom Brady, like, oh, when I get home, like let's practice, like let's beat these guys. Like that. You're probably not going to get any of that online if that guy's like that. Like surely he's just waiting basically for Lancer. It's actually one of the reasons I feel bad for you actually, Moses, that you've only coached in the online period, because I'm sure when you imagine taking a gig like that in the past, you want to be walking out with them on the stage and you want to talk to them before an epic match and give them some of your experiences. You don't really get to do as much of that if it's online, really.
I'll send you a couple of good coach quotes, Jason, for that.
Sure.
Perfect. Gonna need those. Yeah, I mean, obviously you do, but I also when I took this job, I kind of when we were having the conversations, I figured I could think about it 2 different ways. I could think about the online era and be like, shit, this kind of sucks that I'm going to start this coaching and not be able to go to these big events, or I could look at it and say, all right, we have this online era that who knows when it's going to end, but let's say it ends 6 months down the road, that I have 6 months during this online era to really start to understand the ins and out of the job and what it takes and what the team is and where I can fit in. And then, once Lance start to come back, you can be off and running. Like, it would be,
yes.
I don't know if it'd be harder, but it would certainly be completely different and probably way more intense and way more pressure if I'm, figuring out how to coach on the Lanxess stage in front of 14,000 people.
Yes.
Versus playing the ESL One Cologne online rescheduled tournament because of COVID. So in that sense, I think it's probably a little bit more forgiving, but certainly there's going to be different challenges as well.
Sure.
Well, it's also a great chance to experiment with a bunch of stuff. I mean, would Vitality really switch players in the middle of a best-of-5 grand final? If it were in front of 10,000 people or just a huge LAN event. So for those things like the roster moves, but also for your team in terms of strategies, like it's a chance to just build up your playbook and test a bunch of stuff, because, well, in a way you have to. You play so many games that you need to refresh your playbook. You need to try different things, and then you just keep track of what worked, what didn't work, and once you go to LAN, you can kind of have your best strategies already there, because they're already tried and tested if the meta didn't change too much. And given that you have experienced players, right, who are not going to necessarily underperform on LAN by a lot, then you as Jason said, you set yourself up in a good position for success when things go back to normal.
Sure. I actually think that's a good mentality to have, Moses, because basically it's kind of like what I always tell people if they're like beginning content creators, which is like, you know, the people where like their third ever thing they've written, they want to send you and get feedback. It's like, no, go and make like all your mistakes now before any of us know who you are. And then if the first piece I ever actually read of yours, like publicly, is let's say like 20 articles in, and now you've actually got some skills, like now that's how you build a reputation, you know, like by actually, yeah, like you say, like hit the ground running in that sense. Don't try and go at the top while you're still learning the very basics, you know, you've just transitioned. By the way, one thing I thought we could talk about. Oh, go ahead, Janko.
Yeah, just one thing. Like the problem with what I just said is, like, you are still competing all the time.
Sure.
It definitely sucks to lose. So while you're trying to stay positive and do all this stuff, like, it can certainly take a toll, not just on yourself, but on the players as well, on the team. You know, you might be making changes. Look at Mouse Sports, right? They removed Voxic when he was their best player on LAN and the difference maker, right? So you're kind of also forced to make some changes, which in normal circumstances you probably would never have to do. So yeah, in a dream world, you just always look at the positives, and you know, at least you're building your game and working on stuff. But in reality, it's like it can be a bit different.